Well, my guest today is someone I had the pleasure to meet over 25 years ago, and someone I've been really blessed with to have as part of my life ever since. And I have been watching him evolve and create unbelievable things that actually matter to the planet since I was in my 20s. It's an honor to have Dr. David Edwards on the Hack My Age podcast 25 years later. So, to give you a little background, David Edwards is a Harvard researcher who I remember around the 90s was researching and designing inhalable medicine and vaccines that could be delivered to the lungs instead of like taking a pill or a shot. And it sounded so sci-fi to me at the time, but he did it. And as long as I've known him, he's always been working on new ways of improving human health and well-being through the air that we breathe, as well as so many other modalities as well. In the late 90s, he founded and eventually sold a startup called Advanced Inhalation Research, AIR. So you can see he's been involved in the respiratory system and treating infectious diseases through the airways for quite a long time. And for 18 years, David was the professor of the practice of bioengineering at Harvard University in the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. And then he later transitioned to associate, so he could lead the startup of Fend and support the startup of the nonprofit Next Breath. Do you see a theme here? So it's like, and in 2004, he was studying how to protect people from one of the most horrible airborne biological weapons of our time, anthrax. You guys remember that? And he is now one of the world's leading respiratory health scientists today. And today is on a mission to help us all breathe and move about safely during this pandemic with what Time magazine has called the best invention of 2020, Fend, F-E-N-D. And we'll talk about this really cool gadget today. But to give you a bit more background, David's been recognized by so many international organizations, and he's received a ton of honors and awards and accolades, and it just goes on and on. I've seen it all throughout my life. And he's a member of the National Academy of Engineering in both the US and in France. He's also a member of the National Institute of Inventors and a Chevalier of the Arts and Letters by the French Ministry of Culture. It just sounds so regal. He loves writing. He gets up super early while we're all sleeping to write. He's always been that way. And it's a real passion of his. And you can check out his recent book, Creating Things That Matter, which actually won a 2018 Nautilus Book of the Year award. I could go on and on about David. He's done so many brilliant things, and he is a true inventor, creating a ton of other cool stuff, which we won't get into because my focus today is on his latest invention, Fend. So without further ado, meet Dr. David Edwards. Welcome.
Hey, thank you so much. That's too much. It's so lovely to be here with you, Zora. Thank you very much.
Oh, it is all true. It is really, it comes from the heart. And I'm just excited to have a podcast with somebody I've known pretty much most of my life. So I want to get into it because I know you're short on time. I'm super excited about Fend, which you launched about a year ago. And as you know, I just completed my certification as a breathwork teacher of the Oxygen Advantage. And I'm passionate about the breath and how to use it so we can stay healthy and actually sane. And I know you spent literally decades researching respiratory wellness, and you've been able to use this knowledge and your experience to create something incredible in response to COVID. So now a year later, you've got peer-reviewed clinical studies showing the benefits of Fend, and you've decided to launch a new brand and design. So tell us what this means.
Well, again, thank you so much. And yeah, you said a lot in your introduction, and just to kind of trace that story a little bit and give the context for Fend, it is a big moment. It's a big moment on the planet as relates to the air we breathe, and your own work, you're understanding that. And I'll give a little bit of a different perspective. So as you mentioned, my first work was on a project to deliver insulin through the air, through these little wiffle ball particles that allowed very simple inhalers to replace injections for diabetes. And that work led to the government asking me to come to Washington, D.C. in 2001, right after the anthrax scare, with the interest to prevent people from weaponizing things like anthrax in the way as we had weaponized insulin, if you will. And that led to an observation which gets to Fend, that if you put salt in the airways, and at the time we weren't quite sure whether it was the upper airways or the central airways or the lower airways, but if you put salt and water in the airways, you can get rid of these little respiratory droplets that we hear a lot about today because of COVID-19. And we published that in 2004. It led to a company called Matrix, which is now a public company. The world ceased to be so concerned about bioterrorism in the late 2000s. And so that company right now is focused on chronic respiratory disease. I became really interested in olfaction, and which is a whole other story, but very related, and particularly how scent and flavor really has a big impact on longevity, actually, and had developed a platform in a company called Sensory Cloud into the late 2010s when the COVID-19 pandemic began. And given work that I'd done in the 2000s related to anthrax, and given my new work related to the nose and olfaction, I approached the FDA and Janet Woodcock, who leads the drug division, with my former advisor at MIT, Bob Langer, who was for many years the head of the scientific advisory board at the FDA, and made a proposition. It seemed to me at the time that were we to deliver the salts through the nose only to the upper airways, we might get rid of these respiratory droplets. And I'll talk to you about why that matters so much. But at the time we thought, well, these are the droplets that carry COVID-19 from me to you. And it seemed possible from the upper airways to my lower airways. And it seemed that such a product, just delivering salt through the nose, very briefly, could have a big impact on COVID-19. Now, that was really based on the idea that these droplets were being formed right here around the trachea. And the importance of that, Zora, is that when salt is delivered through the nose, the FDA regulates it as a cleanser. Okay, salts are inactive ingredients on the FDA inactive ingredient list. And if you're not delivering it deep into the lungs, it's regulated as a like soap, as a cosmetic. And so it allowed us to get right into human studies. And so we published our first study in the summer of 2020. And indeed, we found that by delivering this spray through the nose to your trachea, we could eliminate these respiratory droplets for several hours with 10 seconds of inhalation. And so that led to a number of studies. We've now completed 8 human trials, 3 in clinics, 3 in workplace, 2 in schools, in 3 continents: India, Germany, and the United States. And given what we've learned, and basically we've looked at children 5 years of age up to elderly in the late 80s, all range BMI, people in very dirty environments, clean environments, people with COVID-19 and not. And generally, the effect of Fend is very much like soap in that it works pretty much every time. And it's really a matter of just applying it effectively. What happened and what led to the moment we're in right now is that the pandemic in India took a really bad turn in the spring of this year. And the product was being used in a clinical trial in Bangalore Baptist Hospital. And the Delta pandemic was such that actually 4 of the staff in the PCR lab died, and everybody was being infected, even though they'd been vaccinated. It was a horrible situation. And the principal investigator decided to begin using Fend to treat incoming patients. And so it led to a randomized placebo control study where 40 COVID-19 patients were randomly selected to either have a nasal saline, simply saline control delivered, or Fend. And I'm going to show you Fend. Actually, this is the new Fend that's coming out this week. Those who received Fend received it 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and night. The way you deliver it is you squeeze this as a cloud here.
If you're listening on the podcast, it looks like a little tubule that's the size of the palm of your hand, and then you can squeeze it from the top to the bottom, and then it lets out droplets in the air, right?
Right, exactly. Exactly. The little droplets of salt water, and there are 2 salts, calcium chloride and sodium chloride. Both are in your body. They're both also in the ocean, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, hopefully. And you point it at your nose, and as it comes out, you take a deep nasal inhalation. So you fill your lungs with air through your nose like this, and you do that twice. So it takes just a few seconds. And
what does it feel like when you inhale it like that?
It's a little bit like the experience of swimming in the ocean. So it's a refreshing feeling. You feel a tingling typically in your nose. In the Bangalore study, patients then received Fend 3 times a day for 3 days, or the nasal saline control. And what was found, and we're submitting the paper this week with lots of other data at this point, was that the COVID-19 patients who received Fend, their symptoms went away. They didn't go away in the nasal saline control. The IV intervention, so most of the patients had high levels of what we call C-reactive protein, which is a measure of inflammation. And so most were highly inflamed. And so most needed to be rescued by IV steroids or antibiotics, but in the Fend study did not. And also really intriguingly, Zora, oxygen saturation went up in the Fend studies statistically significantly, which is actually really quite surprising to us. So the effectiveness of Fend really changed the game for us. So it was clear going into that study that Fend was a new kind of hygiene. We think it's the next global hygiene. It is to the lungs what hand hygiene is to the gut. It reduces the probability of a respiratory infection. But it was not obvious that it would have such a dramatic effect on something as dangerous as the Delta variant of COVID-19. And so we began to develop a new brand. And this is a brand and a design with who used to be the head of design at Apple, Robert Brunner, hired Johnny Eve, designed Beats by Dr. Dre and so forth. And so we created a design that is inexpensive. We'll talk about price, but it's basically $12 to $20, depending upon how many you buy. It has no batteries. It's sterile. It's only salt and water. There is no preservative. It can be kept pretty much indefinitely. It's just salt and water, and pretty much 75 C. Or it really doesn't matter what the temperature is. The product is incredibly stable. And can be used for about a month of regular use. We have a recycle program, and so it's all recyclable and so forth. The brand, which is going to be revealed this week, is really aimed to build a global understanding of this new hygiene with the simplicity of soap. So if you think about the miracle of soap, I don't know if you know the soap story, but it's kind of crazy, is that soap was around for a very, very long time until it was figured out in the middle 19th century that it made sense to wash your hands before you did surgery. And still it was not used. But in the Civil War here in this country, it was found that putting soap in the backpacks of soldiers led to less probability of dying. So the first soap came out in 1870, right after this Civil War, ivory soap. And it became sort of clear through the trauma of the Civil War here in this country that soap meant safety. And it's not that you put on soap, saves soldiers in the Civil War, but you do understand now that washing the hands is something we should all be doing. And that's something that we are aiming to help people understand through this new brand. And I can talk a little bit more about it. But so, yeah, we are super excited about the potential of Fend to help people live more safely and better.
This is an amazing, it's revolutionary when you talk about that way. And so the way I understand it is that you're inhaling basically salt and water through the nose. I love that it goes through the nose, because we are over breathers through our mouth. And a lot of things that I learned about nose breathing are so beneficial. So once you get into the nose, it goes down to the trachea, and that's where it sort of acts like soap and it cleans things out. So in your studies, you showed that we're not breathing out so many harmful particles. So it's safer. We're creating a safer environment for those around us. But what's happening on the inside, so imagine you get some viruses, bacteria, pathogens, whatever is going in. How does it, what happens then with the rest? Like,
for sure.
Clean them and goes out where?
Yeah, great question. And that's what this next paper will show much more clearly, and why it was true that in the COVID-19 study, people's symptoms went down by taking Fend. So it's important to understand how your upper airways work, Zora. So just really briefly, when you breathe, air passes through your nose and mouth and through your trachea, your main bronchi. And what happens in your upper airways and in that region is that the air is moistened and cleaned. Okay, so it's critical that the air, when it gets into your central airways, be 100% saturated with water. I don't know if you realize that your lungs have a surface area equivalent of a tennis court. They're completely covered with water. And if they were not to be kept moist, you would very quickly dehydrate. So it's you hydrate the air and you clean it. So particles fall out of the air in your upper airways and land on a mucus layer that, if everything's in good shape, captures these particles. It could be carcinogens, allergens, pathogens. We breathe in about 1 billion particles a day. And depending on where we're at, it could be 10 billion, it could be 100 million, but it's a lot. And so breathing these things all the time, they land on mucus, and the mucus then, if all things are in good shape, gets moved to the mouth by the action of cilia. And so you swallow these particles soon after you inhale them. And you may then be infected or may inhale SARS-CoV-2 and never know it. In fact, most people, that's the case, because the virus falls onto the mucus and gets cleared to the mouth before it goes deeper in your lungs and leads to severe symptoms. So whether it's asthma or COPD or allergies or a lung infection like an airborne infection like influenza or COVID-19, what is dangerous is when the particles go from your upper airways to your lower airways. And they do that by these respiratory droplets. Okay, so when they get back in the air, so what happens is the mucus, when you dry out the upper airways, or they become really dirty, the surface of the mucus begins to break up when you're breathing, and it forms these little droplets. And so, as you say, they can carry virus out of you, but even more importantly, they carry it into you. And so it leads to a higher probability of a deep lung infection. And so it's important to understand that among the comorbidities that are highly associated with severe symptoms, older age, higher BMI, both of those are conditions that we've shown have a high probability of lots of respiratory droplets. So for reasons that we can describe a little bit later. So in general, these droplets and cleaning away these droplets is important for your own respiratory health.
So once you are able to say, you take this Fend and it goes into you and it sort of cleans these, the virus, bacteria, whatever we have, you swallow them. So you're saying that it's safer that it goes, swallows them into your stomach rather than sit and rest in the trachea, because that may cause more of an infection that leads to other problems.
Well, so
I'm not understanding biology, I think.
yeah. So your gut is really designed because of its acidic conditions, and so it's really designed to eliminate infection and eliminate sort of contaminants from your body. And whereas your lung is not. So the lung, there's no way of excreting things through your lungs. And so your lungs, once particles get beyond the central airways, the lung is defenseless. So the lungs, ultimately in the lower airways, you have your gas exchange region. And so the lungs are really prepared for taking air and pulling oxygen into the blood. And they're not prepared for particles that are not going to dissolve. And so, like I say, it's carcinogens, allergens, pathogens. And so those need to be captured on the trachea and then swept to the mouth like a conveyor belt. And that's how the lungs keep your airways clean.
Okay. So then let's move on, because I have so many other questions too. So you said in the formula that there's salt and water. Okay, so is that it? I mean, is that what we're actually inhaling here? And why is that so powerful?
It's so, in fact, it's important to understand that your airways stay hydrated. And what's critical here, Zora, is that your airways have enough water for this clearance mechanism to work well. And as I mentioned, your airways are constantly putting water in the air to hydrate it. And so you need to keep them really well hydrated. Now, the way they do that is by a balance of water and salt. So you have in your lungs all the salts that are in the ocean. And the reason for that is that wherever you are, whether you're in Marbella or whether you're in Chicago, you're breathing with every breath salt from the ocean. So the ocean, 2/3 of the planet is covered with ocean, and it's putting salt in the air every second. And that salt rises up into the stratosphere, goes around the world. And so we have salt in the air wherever we are, more if you're next to the ocean than not, but generally have salt. And so there's this equilibrium, if you will, that over the history of humanity, we've developed with the environment such that the salts in the ocean are in the lungs. And so among these salts, there is sodium chloride, table salt. And there's also calcium chloride, which is like magnesium chloride, which works also. And these are salts that, by the way, are very abundant in the Dead Sea. And these salts, calcium and magnesium chloride, when they land on the surface of your airway lining mucus, hold that surface together longer than sodium chloride. So basically, by putting salt and water, it's just salt and water, into the airways, you're replenishing salt. And one of the effects that salt has in your airways is it actually pulls water out of the cells that line the airways, and it further hydrates the airways from the systemic water.
So that's the magic of salt. Then it sounds like it would be beneficial to live by the ocean. Like, are those people healthier?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so we in our most recent publication showed that if you look at, for reasons that we've just described, basically, if you look at the COVID-19 pandemic and from the beginning of the pandemic up until March of 2021, when the we had about 10 or 15% vaccination in the country. You look at COVID-19 incidence and death rates geographically, you find that, and when you account, Zora, for all of the other factors like age and economic status and political persuasion and density of living and so forth, you find that if you live in a county next to the sea, particularly on the Pacific coast and the Texas Panhandle, which is where wind blows consistently off the sea, your probability of being infected with COVID-19 and dying of COVID-19 is 25 to 30% less than anywhere else in the country.
That's an incredible statistic. It's quite significant. So it's good that it's not only ocean, but sea. Any other bodies of water, or are you just looked at ocean and sea?
Really salt water, and yeah. It's important to understand that Fend delivers in a single administration the equivalent of the salt that you inhale into your lungs in a day and a night of breathing sea air. So it's about 15,000 breaths equal one Fend.
Wow. So why wouldn't somebody just get a humidifier, throw some salt in there and breathe that? Like, what's the difference between that and, I don't know, there's this neti potty thing that looks horrible to actually go through, but people do it.
Yeah.
Why don't they just do that?
So firstly, it is beneficial to live near the sea. It's beneficial, all things equal, if you live in a really dry environment, to have to humidify your room for sure. The effect, if you were to be in a humid room and breathing humid air, this does clean your airways of these respiratory droplets. When you leave that environment, your respiratory droplets will return to their high level within about an hour. And so the effect of Fend, firstly, you can be anywhere. And it acts within 10 seconds and it lasts for 6 hours. So the Fend is really taking the power of the ocean, putting it in your pocket and allowing you, wherever you are, to have the cleanliness that you would have where you live every second next to the sea.
Yeah. This is okay. That makes perfect sense. So it's a longer effect and it's more effective.
Yeah,
so,
and it's exactly. And the other, just to so you may know that there are now lots of data over the last decades that show that breathing dry air is really bad for lower respiratory tract health. And so whether it's COPD or influenza or COVID-19 or asthma, breathing dry air is dangerous for reasons that we can talk a little bit more about. Breathing humid air helps. However, once as humidity goes, and so typically the recommendation is to condition your air to be about 40 to 60% relative humidity. As the humidity increases, there's a danger of fomites, and fomites are basically particles that are in the air onto which bugs can attach. And so the danger as humidity goes up is that you have other things in the air. So it's a little bit complicated when you talk about I'm living in a really humid environment. Why am I getting sick? Well, there's a lot of other things that can be in the humid environment. So the benefit of Fend is that it's pure water and salt, and it keeps your airways clean, whatever the environment you're in.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. When you think about humidity and mold buildup, that's the first thing that comes to my mind.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So I'm wondering then, I just had a question that totally flipped my mind, but I wanted to ask, well, it'll come back to me. So one thing that I'm catching here that you keep mentioning is that there's hydration, and hydration is really good and really safe. And this is what the state that we want to be in, an optimal hydration rate. And this makes sense because what I've learned through my course is that when we mouth breathe, or we use, even during exercise, we're losing heat and up to 42% more water than if we just breathe through our nose. So we get dehydrated when we're mouth breathers as well. So I'm wondering then, would you say breathing through the nose, would that help protect as well our airway hygiene?
Yeah. So
In some way, maybe
it's
not.
important. It's important to understand that there's many benefits, as you know really well, to breathing through your nose, and among those is a reduction over time in the overall amount of air that you're breathing in your lungs. And so today we overbreathe, if you will. We breathe in more air than our bodies actually need. And that is in part related to a tendency to mouth breathe. The more air we breathe, the more water pulls out of our airways to hydrate that air. So we're hydrating air that we don't need. And so we're giving up more water than we otherwise would. And that dehydrates ultimately our upper airway. So the subject of hydration is really fascinating. And as we all understand, or many of us understand, that there's so many benefits to being well hydrated. What is less known is that even should you drink lots of water, your airways can be dry. And reasons that would lead them to be dry relate to A, breathing really dry air, B, exercising. And so as you exercise, you both breathe in more air and you also obviously are perspiring. And so while you are hydrated, your hydration falls, and as it falls, that dehydrates your upper airways. Other reasons to dry out your airways is breathing really dirty air. So the little particles that come into your air fall onto the surface of your mucus and actually render it really unstable, as if it's dry, it turns out. And so that's a danger factor. Another reason for your airways to dry out is infection. And so one of the amazing things we see, Zora, is that if I were to measure the respiratory droplets in your airways, let's say it's 10 particles per liter, very few particles, which is typical for a healthy individual. Were you to be infected by influenza or COVID-19, we would see typically a sudden increase in the number of droplets that are in the air, maybe 1,000. So there are maybe 10,000. The highest number we've seen to date is about 60,000. And so you can go from having 6 particles in the air to 60,000 particles in the air. And once the infection goes, it falls back to baseline. It's really crazy. So in COVID-19, what we found and have published is that there's about a week or 10-day period after you're infected where there's a lot of droplets in the air. And that, of course, is a kind of a survival tendency of the virus, right? It knows how to get to where it needs to go to proliferate. And but it makes once you get infected, it makes it very highly probable that that infection is going to get deep in your lungs and lead to symptoms or go out and infect other people. And that's why you need to keep your airways clean. Now, one of the things that we've learned is crazy. One of the NIH lead researchers contacted me many months ago and said, it may be that one of the reasons why masks are proving so effective is that they're humidifying the upper airways, right? Because they're not very good at capturing particles. Little particles typically go around the masks. And so we then did a study, and one of our papers shows that actually when you wear a mask, it has this humidifying effect on the airways, like you're in a humid room. So the benefit of upper airway hydration is something that makes sense even if we are well hydrated.
Yeah, this is perfect. It makes perfect sense to me now. And I'm wondering, so we know that as we get older, we tend to get more dehydrated. And we also tend to be less oxygenated. Our blood has less oxygen in it. And are these two challenges of aging like somehow interrelated?
Yeah, that's just a fascinating topic that we're learning a lot about right now. So it turns out, and this will be in the paper that we're submitting this week, that when your upper airways are dehydrated, one of the most important anatomical features of your upper airways is your larynx. So your larynx is in the middle of your trachea, and inside your larynx you have the vocal cords, or what we call the vocal folds. And so the larynx has a constriction in the center of it called the glottis, and it kind of looks like an hourglass, if you will. And inside of that, you've got these tissues that are need to be very hydrated, and they vibrate really, really fast when you breathe out at a high speed, and that's what speaking is basically, or singing. And so when they vibrate, they lead to sound production. Now, when you breathe in, your glottis, or your larynx, opens up, and when you breathe out, it closes. And so it's opening and closing, even when you're just breathing. And it turns out that the degree of opening is very much related to the amount of water in your larynx. And that's why singers are recommended to hydrate their larynx. Right? And so it leads to a more open glottis and a better sound quality. So what we found, and this is a discovery we made after the study in Bangalore, when we saw the oxygen increase, the question was what was going on. And what we've learned, Zora, is that that Fend hydrates your larynx and leads to your larynx opening up. And particularly when you have a dry larynx, and why would you have a dry larynx? Well, you're dehydrated, you're older, larger BMI, you're infected, you're breathing really dry air. It leads to oxygen falling, and we can increase oxygen by better hydrating our larynx. So what we're learning is that older people, all of us as we age, we tend to dehydrate, and reasons for that include many things, but one of them is that we begin to lose some of the neuronal signals that tell us we're thirsty. There's more to it than that, but that's one of the factors. And so there's a tendency for, as you get older, you lose hydration, and also as you get older, you lose oxygenation. And what we're finding is that those two are in part connected, and they're connected because of the hydration of your upper airways. So we're really exploring right now our ability to help older people keep their oxygen levels higher, which is really quite critical to organ function and longevity ultimately.
Absolutely. This makes, yeah. So inhaling and Fend, for example, and then you hydrating the airways, and then this increases your oxygenation of the blood. I'm really excited for this study. I don't know how you do all these studies. My gosh, they're like popping them out. So it's fantastic. So I think this is it really is everything all connected. And definitely when people have to understand, when your blood is more oxygenated, everything functions better. You need that oxygen to get to those cells, to those tissues, to have overall, just well-being and better health. Things will function better. You'll have more energy, right? You're going to feel great. So this is a really fantastic product for gosh, I can see so many different populations taking advantage of this. So when we're talking a little bit about hydration and oxygenation, so this reminds me a little bit about our studies in the Oxygen Advantage, that if our blood is oxygenated, because what we're trying to do with the breath work is oxygenate the blood, and this is incredible how it works. And if you understand the Bohr effect, the BOHR, this is when you are having increased levels of carbon dioxide in the body, and then hemoglobin, which carries 98% of your oxygen, is able to release into the bloodstream. And this is what I understand. So correct me if I'm wrong. So great, we see more oxygenated blood. So does this mean with this type of technique, would we also be more hydrated? Does it work in reverse?
Yeah, so just to talk a little bit more about how the how oxygen gets into our blood, and then how does it get to the organs that need it. So the Bohr effect, as you described, and how does this relate to Fend? So um, the when our organs of our body are functioning at a high rate and metabolizing, they produce a lot of CO2. And as you mentioned, hemoglobin in our blood, as it passes through the gas exchange regions of the lungs, the capillaries around deep lungs, it picks up oxygen, hemoglobin, it sticks to oxygen. And when it is exposed to CO2, it releases oxygen. And so that's the Bohr effect. And the importance of that is that it basically it's kind of like a football player crossing the goal line. So it releases the ball, and so that's really important. Now, what the reason why Fend is helpful and ultimately assists the Bohr effect, if you will, is that it leads to a more, in all of things equal, a more oxygenated hemoglobin that then has more oxygen to deliver as you have CO2 triggering it, and so it ultimately leads just to a more effective oxygen transfer from the air to your body, basically.
And just a quick thing I didn't mention with the Bohr effect, when the increase of CO2, this is some of the breath holds that we're practicing as well. When you hold your breath, CO2 increases. I forgot to mention that. But I wanted to ask them, just going back to the title of this podcast was Dirty Air, some of the risks and prevention. We know. What other risks? I mean, we understand, our risk for COVID or our risk for viruses. If you live in a really polluted area, or even not such a polluted area, but what are some of the risks that people need to be aware of?
So yeah, really good question. So it's important to talk a second about dirty air. So dirty air is, on the one hand, the air over the skies of California during a California wildfire, and so we are used to associating dirty air with cloudiness, and yet the dirt in the air that's most dangerous is dirt you can't see. So the particles that we there's an air quality index that any of us have wherever we live. If you look online, AQI, and the AQI, as the number goes high, above 40, say, it means that the air is dirty. And one of the, it could be 200 or 250 in a really dirty city. As one of the important contributors to the AQI is something called the PM 2.5. And so it's the particle mass below 2.5 microns. Now, that's about 50 times smaller than a hair on my head, thickness of the hair on my head. So it's so small you can't see it. And what's important about those particles is that when you breathe them into your lungs, they enter your lungs and have a high chance of depositing there. So basically, and if I were, by the way, to go into your room and measure the particles in the air, there might be 10,000 particles per liter or 20,000, and 90% of those are smaller than 1 micron. So most of the particles in the air are really small. So now I say all of that just to say that, I'm here in Boston right now, and as the wildfires in California have burned, we've had days here in Boston where our AQI was 80, and normally it's like 10. And so the air looks clean, but you've got a lot of particles in the air. So we are all, right now, the estimate is about 9 out of 10 of us on the planet are breathing dirty air. And another way of thinking about it is that 90% chance that you, sometime in the course of the day, are breathing dirty air. And why does that matter? Well, respiratory disease includes COPD and asthma and influenza and COVID-19 and lung cancer, ultimately, is now the #1 killer in the world, in the developing world. Soon, it's becoming the #1 killer in the world as a whole. And that is only getting worse. So for our kids and our grandkids, the future is a future of increasingly, unfortunately, dirty air. And so why that matters is that as we breathe in these particles, as I mentioned, there's carcinogens and allergens and pathogens, and they increase the probability of respiratory disease. So the question becomes, well, who should be fending, right? And so we've talked about older folks and those who are at risk of exposure to COVID-19. Well, really, the question is who should be washing their hands, right? And so in principle, it's something we should all do. It's true that some of us are in dirty environments than others, and there's certain circumstances where you just need to wash your hands like 5 times a day. So if you think of it that way, we should all be practicing airway hygiene. We're all at risk. And particularly if you're in an environment where you're breathing dirty air, you should practice airway hygiene 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and the evening before you go to bed. Nighttime is super important, right? So nighttime is a time when often, Zora, your oxygen levels fall, right? And so you become an obligate nose breather when you sleep. And many of us have reasons that our air does not flow so well through our nose. And obviously sleep apnea is an enormous problem. Sleep apnea is basically your oxygen level falls below 90 at night. And one of the things that happens as you age, you often put on body mass, and your the flesh in the back of your mouth as you lie down begins to press up against your nasal passages and can lead to poor airflow, or you just have a nasal blockage for whatever reason. And that leads to just a poor oxygen uptake. And so taking Fend before you go to bed helps clear your nasal passages and breathe better and be better oxygenated at night.
Interesting. So I think it was something from my coursework, it was something like 80% of the population are mouth breathers, something like that. Don't quote me, but it was something very high. And when you're a mouth breather, it leads to a lot of other things. And of course, your oxygenation is going to be quite lower. So a lot of it's like a perpetuating problem when you're breathing through the mouth, your nose doesn't function as well and it can get blocked, or people's nose are deviated septums and they, reverse. So in fact, if you're able to clear the airways in your nose and then sleep at night with your mouth closed, I can just see a whole lot of benefits.
Yeah. So we launched our first product about a year ago, and what we think of as our minimally viable product. It was really a hack of a product we developed for flavor delivery, and we have about 10,000 consumers in the United States who've been using the product, and a lot of families. So very typical purchaser is a care provider, mother or father, and with kids, or a teacher or an employer. And generally, the number one, well, I would say most of the reason for purchase over the last year has been fear of COVID-19, but most of the reason for continued use, and we have an incredibly committed consumer base, 83% referral rate, and people are using the product 2 or 3 times a day, and the number one comment, Zora, is that those who have allergy symptoms are taking their allergy meds a lot less, if at all. And so there's a big impact on allergy and just better breathing. A second very common comment is a reduction in exercise-induced asthma, which is also a laryngeal effect. And thirdly is just a kind of avoidance of infection.
Wow, it's worth a try. If you guys haven't, it's something that's affordable. It's something that is not difficult to take. There's no negative side effects, right? That you've come
There
up with?
are not, now it's again, very soap-like, so you can, just to put it in perspective, when you deliver a single administration of Fend, you deliver the about a 1/500th of the calcium that you get in a glass of milk. So it's a very small amount of calcium and sodium. Um, it's if you have inflamed sinuses and you take Fend, it can sting, and it very much like salt in a wound. So if it doesn't hurt you, but it's not pleasant. So it's kind of an immediate feeling, and so it's not a common condition, but it can be a condition. But otherwise, no. It's again, it's as safe as breathing air next to the sea.
Oh, excellent. That's really good to hear. And you said a cartridge lasts about a month or so, and
Yeah,
then,
yeah. The new Fend, which comes out this week, I think there's 100 actuations or something like that, and so using 3 times a day, it lasts for about a month.
mm. Is there an age limit? Because I know you did studies on from 5 to their 80s. What about
No,
younger or older?
there's not. We've not looked at younger children, only because there's a need to coordinate breathing, and so it's just a matter of. But in principle, there's no age limit. No.
Okay. Do you deliver internationally?
Not yet, although we will over the course of this year. We're in lots of conversations, but obviously this is a new consumer behavior, and as you know, new behaviors are really, really difficult to enact, and it typically takes a traumatic sort of experience like the Civil War, or in our case, COVID-19. And so we are seeing a change of behavior, right? We are all kind of, our hygiene habits have changed pretty dramatically here in the last couple of years. And so Fend, we're really working on learning how to get adoption here in the United States before we bring it to other countries, but it will happen soon. One of the things when the product comes out on Wednesday, and if you purchase the product, and you'll be able to find it on our website, there will be a guarantee from me that if you take the 21-day Breathe Better challenge and don't find that Fend is helping you breathe better, we'll give you a money back guarantee. And the 21-day challenge involves receiving a text message a day with a video from me. And so we have 21 short 1-minute videos that help you understand how your airways work, how they break down in terms of being clean, how Fend works, how to measure the effect of Fend, and how to feel it yourself, and then why it matters in the long term. So education, we're learning how that works, and so hopefully later this 2022, you'll be able to have Fend in Spain too.
Excellent. Yes, I got to get my hands on it. I'm going to try to grab one from my son or my kids, coming from the US. So if you are in the US, you can go to Hello Fend. That's Fend, right? Hello, just like normal.com, hellofend.com. If you're interested in talking to David, you can reach out to him on Instagram at David A. Edwards, PhD, or you've got Fend questions. It's at Hello Fend on Instagram. Is that correct?
I think that's right. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then the website, also, if you want to reach out to David, davidideas.com. He's just brilliant. And you'll be lucky if he's got time to answer your question, but you try. But Hello Fend has got a whole support team as well. And I strongly recommend everyone to start washing your hands. I mean, washing your airways and get used to that. It'll be something I'll be doing as soon as I get my hands on. Is there anything else that you'd like to let us know before I let you go?
No, Zora, just thank you so much. It's been so lovely to talk to you, and I can't wait to see you somewhere in the world here in the next months. Okay.
Yeah, we'll be fending all day long.
All right. Thanks so much.
All
Huh?
right. Good luck. Thank you
Okay.
so much. And I'll
You
see
bet.
you next time. Bye
Okay.
bye.